Um, Great. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special webinar series, The Crisis in Intelligence Policy Relations, Intelligence Function in the Age of Populism and Democratic Backsliding. My name is Ofek Rima. I'm the coordinator of the Israeli Forum for Intelligence Studies, also known as IFIS. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, IFIS, I will say just a few brief introduction words. IFIS was established over 2 years ago as the initiative of the Institute for the Research of the Methodology of Intelligence at the Israeli Intelligence Community Heritage and Commemoration Center in Herzliya. And today it also operates with the support of the Leonard Davis Institute for International Relations at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank both organizations for backing and supporting this initiative, and specifically this important webinar. IFIS was established to promote research and education on intelligence in Israeli academia. Primarily, what we do is we provide a platform for exchanges among Israeli scholars of intelligence, both senior and junior, and among them in international groups and scholars of intelligence. We do monthly meetings. Some of them are virtual, like this one, and they usually take place in English, and some of them are in person, usually in Hebrew, except for our annual conference, which I would like to say a few words about that. If you can scan the QR code, it will lead to the call for papers that is currently open. It's a call for papers and awards nomination for our annual conference, which will take place in Jerusalem in late October, 28, 29. Just so you know, we have decided on May 31st, so at the end of this month, as the first deadline for submissions. This is to allow more time and perhaps certainty for international participants to prepare and to purchase their tickets. And then on July 31st, we will have the final deadline, after which we will announce the program. About this series of webinars, the reason for it is that the failure on October 7 put a lot of strain on the relationship between the intelligence and policymakers in Israel. While the government here is still reluctant to establish a national commission of inquiry, the public remains exposed to a barrage of mudslings and engineered leaks that speak to the overall lack of trust, learning, and reform. This reached a boiling point in the last few weeks when the government wished to dismiss the head of the Internal Security Agency, also known as the Shabak or the Shin Bet, and encountered resistance from both the director, Ronen Bar, himself, and civil society. In a deposition to the Supreme Court, Bar wrote that he is submitting it out of my duty, quote, to the citizens of Israel, as well as deep concern regarding the ability of future heads of the service to uphold the organization's statist character, mamlachtiyut, its professionalism, and its operations strictly in line with its legal mandate. End of quote. But while Israel is in many ways a unique case, and the colossal failure on October 7 is obviously a singular event, it is also not that unique. Intelligence policy relations are undergoing upheavals around the democratic world in an age of populism, which some view as the driving force of democratic backsliding, and others as a corrective force seeking to reform power structures. As the Central Forum for Intelligence Scholars, certainly in Israel, and as part of the global academic community of students of intelligence, we felt compelled to address this pressing issue. So we put together this series that explores this phenomenon from various angles and puts it in a wider perspective. So not just intelligence, but civil service, not just Israel, but also other countries. And this will be the issue of today's session. We will look overseas to intelligence policy relations in Poland and the United States. We try to keep these webinars limited to 1 hour, given their frequency in the late hour here in Israel. So both our speakers will have 15 to 20 minutes each, not more, please, followed by a Q&A. Our first speaker is Colonel retired Grzegorz Małecki, who served as the director of the Polish Foreign Intelligence Agency, AW, from 2015 to 2016 under the Law and Justice government. Prior to his appointment in 2015, Colonel Małecki enjoyed a career of 22 years in Polish intelligence and security services, performing high-level duties in the Office of State Protection, the Internal Security Agency, and the Committee for Intelligence and Security Services in the Prime Minister's office. After his retirement, Colonel Małecki served in various research and management positions in public and civil society organizations. Since 2019, he has been regularly cooperating as an external expert for DCAF, the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, for example, in projects related to reform of the national security system of Ukraine. From 2021, he has been acting as chief advisor to the parliamentary team for reform of intelligence and security services in the lower house of parliament, the Sejm of the Republic of Poland. We are very honored to have you here. The floor is yours, and I will introduce our second speaker before his remarks. So please.
Thank you very much. I will try to use efficiently my 15 minutes, but I know that it could be complicated. So I will start immediately. So just one important remark that in Polish legislation uses the term special services, not intelligence, but special services as a collective term for the services, currently 5 services of civil and military, foreign intelligence and security and counterintelligence, as well as of the National Anti-Corruption Service, which is not a typical intelligence service, but more police. This concept occurs in the so-called competence laws concerning these 5 services. None of the acts specifies its definition, limiting itself to granting the service as a specific status of special service. AW, which is I was head of this service, is a typical civilian foreign intelligence service responsible for conducting intelligence operations outside the country, aimed at collecting, analyzing, and processing intelligence regarding threats to national security and state international position and transmitting it to state authorities for strategic decision-making process. Its Israeli partner is Mossad. Its tasks also include, among others, conducting SIGINT, recognizing and monitoring the international arms trade market, and which is not typical for all services, protecting Polish diplomatic missions as well as their cryptographic communications. AW, like other force special services, reports to the Prime Minister, who appoints and dismisses its head and his deputies, and its direct superior is the Minister Coordinator acting under PM authority if appointed, because it is not a typical. It's not always. The status of AW is identical to the other of identical to that of the other for special services, except that, like the military foreign intelligence services, it is prohibited from conducting operations within the country, only abroad. When describing the nature of the intelligence policymakers relationship in Poland, one should notice a fundamental contradiction that is a characteristic feature of the system. On the one hand, policymakers are to some extent hostages of special services, which in practice determine what, when, and on what terms they make available to policymakers. The services also decide in practice on the scope and forms of oversight and control of their activities, ensuring that the system prevents any real control and insight into secrets regarding their activities. As a result, they basically have full freedom in setting themselves tasks and accounting for them. However, they use such a convenient situation, unfortunately, almost exclusively to protect their own particular interests, avoid control, and maintain and expand their privileges and powers. As a result, they focus on maintaining the status quo, blocking any reforms and combating abuses and irregularities, and at the same time expanding powers. On the other hand of this paradox, policymakers do not show any will to change, but the services and put the services under real control, aimed primarily at involving them in the process of governing the state and solving real problems, especially preventing them. They show the policymakers, they show an almost incomprehensible concern to keep services on the margins of state life, keeping them away from all decision-making processes. At the same time, however, they feel exempt from taking care of these services and increasing their effectiveness. Instead of building and improving instruments to provide objective knowledge of the quality of their activities and forcing their constant improvement, they are content with unilateral assurance from trusted leadership that everything is fine. One can say that policymakers many years ago, somewhere since 2002, abdicated the management of special services and their use to govern the state, leaving them a free hand in all matters that concern them. For many years, the principle has prevailed in the world of politics that the services themselves decide about the affairs of the services, and possibly the political supervisors, who in practice are the hostages or advocates, in uncritically authorizing blind proposals submitted by the services themselves, provided that they are headed by trusted political appointees. Policymakers believe in Poland that for control over the services, the Prime Minister's right to appoint and dismiss heads of services practically at his own discretion is sufficient. It has become a tradition in recent decades for every prime minister to name the leadership of the services when he or she takes power. Policymakers believe that the nomination of people who enjoy the personal trust of the prime minister, often suggested to him by the political base, as heads is a sufficient guarantee of taking control of services. Such a tradition causes, on the one hand, that there's a disappearance of control mechanisms providing objective knowledge about the situation in the services, which in turn creates a basis for abuses and scandals. On the other hand, it drastically weakens the position of heads of services, making them clients of policymakers on whom their careers depend. A separate issue is the systematic reducing of the professional level of heads of services, the main advantage of whom is loyalty and submission to the prime minister or the person who promotes his or her candidacy. To sum up this part, in Poland, we are dealing with a situation that has persisted for many years, in which anti-development and some kind of Cold War mindset prevails in the special services apparatus. At the same time, among policymakers and government administration have not developed so-called security culture or intelligence culture specific to modern democratic states, which is an essential condition for natural and systemic modernization processes in this area. I will present some observations, but more punctual, about these relationships, special services policymakers, just to let you know how it is organized in practice. So Polish special services are very hermetic, isolated from the world of politics and government administration, which makes them distrustful of them, do not understand them or the real needs, and therefore services are in fact useless to them. There are not natural channels of communication between these worlds that exist and operate separately from each other, practically do not intersect or interpenetrate. The world of politics is characterized by a lack of trust in the services, is afraid of and avoids them, and is guided by prejudices, myths, and legends spread by the media and the internet. It doesn't understand them and doesn't know anything about them. Both worlds use different languages, conceptual codes, categories, perspectives. There are no traditions, mechanisms, structures, procedures for cooperation and communication between those worlds. The world of politics has virtually no its own experts specializing in services, special services, guided by political mindset, able to talk to the services as equals and influence them, transferring the needs and sensitivity of state policy to the level of services. It is sporadic for people from special services, retired people from special services, to transfer into the world of politics. And if they do, they move their own mindset there instead of adopting sensitivity and political thinking enriched with the knowledge and understanding of the services. In effect, this very modest staff of the civilian oversight and control apparatus is settled by service people who represent the interests of the services themselves and their way of thinking and perspective instead of being an intermediate link between these worlds, like sluice, guaranteeing the flow of thoughts in both directions. As a result, thinking about the services of politicians and officials participating in oversight and control is tainted by the perspective of only the services, often combined with fascination with them. Oversight and control authorities become a barrier and not a sluice. And one important remark, that communication between these two worlds takes place through a very narrow channel in the form of the heads of services that are guided in this process solely by their own interests. Most contacts are formal and official and take place in the form of ceremonial events and exchange of documents. And the latter form, accounting for almost 99% of the exchange, is characterized by a lack of feedback. Documents are written in a hermetic language, being created in isolation from the recipients and without awareness of their real needs and expectations. If we are talking about the problems and challenges under former or previous government of justice and law and justice peace in Polish letters, and during this time. So I was asked to present some remarks about challenges and problems. So the challenge facing peace when it took power in 2015 was the obsolete and completely ineffective institutional and functional model of the Polish special services apparatus, existing without fundamental changes since the mid-90s, deteriorating material and financial situation of the services for years, their low effectiveness and deteriorating level of professionalism, including the use of modern technologies. For years, the services had been deprived of a long-term vision and development and modernization, constituting a kind of fifth wheel for the politicians in power at that time, to which the state authorities and the ruling political parties paid little attention. They did this only when the existence of activities of the services could cause political problems for them, that they did so to a narrow extent aimed at solving a given problem on an ad hoc basis. Such problems that focused attention on the services were scandals originating from the services. The services were therefore not a tool for managing state security, but only a potential source of political problems. All actions taken very superficial and reactive were therefore aimed solely at changes that may limit this destructive impact for the ruling camp. These have never been initiatives aimed at increasing the effectiveness, professionalism, and in particular the quality of the management. This issue was beyond the sphere of interest of the ruling camp before the elections in 2015. The response to the crisis in the services in 2015 was to be a comprehensive reform of the system of oversight, control, and coordination of special services, intended to guarantee the maximum professionalism and efficiency, as well as the construction of modern mechanisms to eliminate abuses and irregularities. In the face of the reform announcements was the prominent PiS politicians, Mariusz Kamiński, who enjoyed the full trust of PiS leader, who was and is Jarosław Kaczyński. The concept assumed the appointment, a position of a minister coordinator for special services, equipped with extensive competence in the field of oversight, control, and coordination, and in the next step, the creation by law of a permanent executive apparatus in the form of so-called Ministry for Special Services. And was supposed to be effective coordination and management of the entire service apparatus and building democratic system of oversight and control over services. Only the first step was taken. Kamiński was appointed coordinator minister and took full control over the entire service apparatus based on the Prime Minister's order, not law. After the first few months of the government, Minister Kamiński quickly began to move away from the original concept of system reform and turned his attention in completely different directions. Instead of modernizing the service apparatus, Kamiński, who gained full independence and autonomy in the field of services, made a civilization regression and began to recreate Cold War behavior, mechanism, methods. The special services began to resemble the security services of communist Poland. To sum up a period of PS rule, no systemic changes were introduced. At the same time, the existing dysfunctions and weaknesses limiting the quality and usefulness of services for the state were perpetuated and deepened, and external oversight and control were limited to a minimum. The changes introduced were basically limited to replacement of personnel based on the model of manual control of services used by minister coordinator. It is based on the minister's personal trust in people holding commanding position. The element of oversight and control were replaced by the selection of people with the full personal trust of the decision makers. At the same time, the activity of Kamiński and his team focused on the accumulation of power in the hands of trusted people indicated by him, guaranteeing submission and availability and methodically expanding the competencies of the services. This process was accompanied by activity in providing services with access to the new surveillance technology. This is not a negative phenomenon in itself, but in case of PiS, it was subordinated to the goal of expanding power over society and interfering in the lives of selected people and social groups. The surveillance activity of the services was carried out under the pretext of combating crime and terrorism, and after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, combating Russian interference. But in fact, its aim was to surveil and combat people and circles considered hostile by PiS, as well as internal opposition within PiS towards Kamiński and his allies. They were the main goal of using the latest surveillance techniques, such as well-known Pegasus, which was purchased and used by the Anti-Corruption Bureau and not counterintelligence or foreign intelligence. And going to the end, some remarks, some words about what changed under the new government.
In a minute or two, if you can.
Comment?
In a minute or two, if you can.
After the formation of the new government in December 2023, the changes were limited only to the replacement in one day of the heads of all 5 special services and cosmetic changes at lower levels of management. Until now, no significant systemic organization and functional changes have been introduced or even announced. Contrary to the declaration before the 2023 elections, none of the loud and shocking scandals involving the secret services from the peace era were explained, nor, of course, the responsible people were held accountable. No initiative has been taken towards the reform or, in principle, the construction of a system of democratic oversight and control over the special services. This topic does not exist in political discourse as well as in the programs of the main political parties. So it can be said that after the change of power in the matter of special services, nothing has changed. The past 10 years have been then completely wasted when it comes to building an oversight system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. So now we move to our second speaker, Professor David V. Gioe, British Academy Global Professor in the Department of War Studies at King's College London. He is also the Director of Studies for the Cambridge Security Initiative and the co-convener of its International Security and Intelligence Program. Previously, he taught in the Department of History at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Professor Gioe is a former CIA analyst, an operations officer, and a U.S. Navy veteran. His research was published in Intelligence and National Security, the Journal of Cyber Policy, Political Science Quarterly, and many more. Professor Gioe, please, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Ofek. It's a pleasure to join you. I'll make this short. I'd like to make 3 major points in my allotted time, and I'll just get right into it. First, countries actually can regress or move backwards vis-a-vis their understanding and use of intelligence. That is to say, they can actually become less sophisticated consumers of intelligence. And in fact, this was one of the key ideas of Christopher Andrews' 2018 book, The Secret World. Intelligence in statecraft doesn't follow a straight line forward, and countries can actually forget or misremember their own experience with intelligence. Sometimes they have to rediscover the importance of intelligence and the mechanisms to use it effectively. And so getting toward the topic for today, swinging toward extreme populism, to me, seems to be one of the ways that countries can actually move away from intelligence best practices that are hopefully standard in democracies. Second, intelligence under populism shares a lot of characteristics, in my view anyway, with intelligence under autocracies. And I see Hugh Dillon and Elena Grossfeld on the call, and we've written quite a bit about intelligence under autocracies. And I think there are some parallels here that are useful. We can think of populist governments acting very much like autocratic governments in that they dismiss expertise and dissenting views. And they can sometimes lean into the conspiratorial as well. So democratic governments that travel toward populism may also travel some way down the road toward authoritarianism, at least from an intelligence policy relations perspective. Third, and this is where I want to spend the remainder of my time, is that I believe intelligence failures in populist governments actually look something like the sorts of intelligence failures that are suffered by autocratic governments. As Richard Betts and others have shown us, intelligence failures are inevitable for lots of reasons, including the fact that intelligence is just plain hard, but they get harder for very human reasons. Intelligence fails in democracies, of course, as elsewhere. But my contention with you here tonight is that intelligence in a populist context is actually more likely to fail in ways that would remind us of autocratic intelligence failure because of several factors. And so I'd like to then just list them under kind of point 3 here, with some references to what's going on in the moment in the US, as Ofek, you asked me to do, in terms of President Trump and his administration's relationship with intelligence generally and his intelligence community more specifically. So I just have 6 comments or so on that. The first is that intelligence fails under populist and autocratic systems because of a lack of analytical dissent and challenge. The context is one in which a diversity of unvarnished views or interpretations is stymied. Political leaders in such systems are obsessed with loyalty and generate a culture of sycophancy staffed by toadies and yes men. We can see the most important qualification to serve in President Trump's administration is personal loyalty to him. Of course, presidents should be able to expect a level of loyalty to the administration's policies and even their political masters, I think, to a degree. But what we're seeing is an expectation of personal loyalty, even above the Constitution, above truth, above empiricism, and above what we know to be intelligence best practice, often through learning the hard way. We've seen a recent gutting of the National Security Council and the firing of the director of the National Security Agency and his deputy at the behest, apparently, of a conspiracist who claimed that they were insufficiently loyal. The people at the NSC, I don't know them in full disclosure, but I'm told that they were widely seen as competent and actually on board with the administration's agenda. But once you get loyalty tests in the mix, it's just counterproductive. Second, we can expect both authoritarian and populist governments to politicize intelligence to fit their preferred narrative. I'm not saying other countries don't do this, but I think it's more prevalent in these types of contexts. As applied to the US, the DNI recently fired the chair of the National Intelligence Council and his deputy, ostensibly because they signed off on an analytical assessment concluding that the criminal group Tren de Aragua was not specifically directed by the Venezuelan government to do things in the United States. And this was after their initial stab at that same question. And a senior Trump loyalist at the DNI asked the National Intelligence Council, or the NIC, to, quote, relook at that question. I'm assuming because they didn't like the first answer. Now, this has to be, I mean, this is important for the Trump administration because this effectively intelligence judgment is the underlying talking point basis for the Trump administration to invoke an act to deport Venezuelans. But the second conclusion after the relook that was reached looked much the same as the first conclusion. And so Secretary of State Marco Rubio then went on television and said that the NIC assessment was wrong, I suppose to keep the administration's narrative going for policy reasons. Firing officials for their assessments could foreseeably lead to self-censorship, which is a key ingredient to groupthink that, as we know, leads to intelligence failure. Likewise, assessments derived to please political masters invite policymakers to remain in their own echo chambers. We can see this, for instance, in the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the intelligence assessments from the Russian intelligence community that went with that. Former chief of Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, Sir Alex Younger, put it this way, quote, Donald Trump's decision to sack securocrats for doing their jobs seems to carry a very significant risk that the appetite for speaking truth to power will be diminished, and that generally leads to intelligence failure, end quote. Third, we can see that populists like to cherry pick intelligence, again, they all do, but that they agree with. And in fairness, it's tempting to do this. Lots of policymakers do it. We saw the Bush administration do it, but it's nevertheless a problem. And going back to the Marco Rubio example that I've just mentioned of casting doubt on the NIC report on Tren de Aragua, he stated that he agreed with the FBI's assessment. Why? Because the FBI wasn't in line with the rest of the U.S. intelligence community with the NIC's conclusion. They felt more certain along the administration's sort of party line that the TDA's activities were at some level facilitated or directed by the Maduro regime. And the rest of the community felt those reports weren't credible, and so they were discounted in the final analytical judgments. But those were the ones most closely aligned with the administration's political narrative, So those are the ones that were emphasized by Secretary Rubio, who was also now the National Security Advisor, maybe a separate talk, but or maybe for Q&A. So such blatant politicization of intelligence could also result in U.S. liaison partners having less confidence in the U.S. as a preferred intelligence partner. If that were to happen, perhaps they would share less intelligence and perhaps less specific intelligence. That in turn may rob the USIC of a key clue that would be needed to help it make sense of a plot. Fourth, populist and autocratic governments wish to direct the work of intelligence and security agencies toward their own political ends, which is related to policy, of course, but not the same thing. In the US case, this takes the form of misappropriating, in Dave Gioe's view, intelligence resources away from actual threats. For instance, the DNI recently put out a collection emphasis message on intelligence requirements related to Greenland, seeking to understand the questions about the strength of their independence movement. This is, of course, to do with the president's view that Greenland should be annexed by the US. But I worry about using intelligence resources on questions that, in my view, just don't need to take up intelligence bandwidth. Greenland, I don't think, is a security threat for Americans. Fifth, if we can see that populists and autocrats want to hear certain kinds of intelligence judgments, then we can also infer that they may not want to hear certain kinds of things or be concerned with other traditional intelligence priorities. For instance, FBI Director Kash Patel's recent reorganization at the FBI has reoriented the FBI away from counterintelligence work, which means fewer resources going into investigating Russian intelligence activity in the US, as a for instance. Likewise, media reports claim that the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, it's a mouthful, CISA, is also reorienting cyber collection away from Russia. Sixth, the American version of populism, we have a very sort of specific flavor of it, and it's associated with nativism and isolationism. And this means that intelligence about the world may simply be less interesting or valued because from an isolationist point of view, you don't really see the need for a robust intelligence picture. Politico, the magazine and online blog, has reported that President Trump has only had the president's daily briefing about 12 times in his first 100 days and is now getting intelligence briefings only a couple times a week or less. Now, maybe he's just not that interested in it, or maybe he doesn't understand the value. Finally, populists and autocrats directly or indirectly close off their intelligence communities to the fullest potential of their citizens by messaging that only certain types of people or perspectives should join up. My view is that intelligence conducted under such conditions as I've described in this short presentation undermines morale, harms employee retention, and jeopardizes recruiting. In the US at the moment, public service in intelligence or security may not look appealing to our best and brightest, robbing the US of its top talent to keep America safe and to provide decision advantage to our leaders. Trying to conduct statecraft in a dangerous world without the benefit of your full human capital could also lead to strategic surprise or intelligence failure. So to conclude, as I've said before, intelligence is hard enough without creating additional challenges to good intelligence, such as those intelligence own goals suffered by populists and autocrats. It's for these reasons that I think intelligence failure is more likely under such governments, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't worry about the direction of travel for the US. In short, as we move toward populism, we move toward intelligence failure. And I look forward to discussing this with you further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for this very powerful presentations. We will now have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So please, if you have a question, raise your virtual or physical if you're unable to find the virtual hand. And we already have, so Stephanie, go ahead, and then Professor Rovner, good to see you.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the two very interesting talks. Actually, Dave, you already mentioned it, that the populist relationships. So populism and intelligence already has an influence on liaison. And my question for both of you, first of all, for the Polish case, during the time of peace, how did it affect liaison? And also now in the US case, we all know that, for example, I'm from Austria, we're very dependent on the US in terms of intelligence. So to what extent do you think does it already affect liaison, or is liaison so much insulated from the political leadership that this will actually not be harmed?
So, Colonel Małecki, would you like to take that first? And
But what kind of liaison could you?
I mean, like the international relations of intelligence agencies. How was the reputation and the integration of the intelligence services during the time of peace in Poland, let's say with the NATO partners or with the US or other partners?
Okay, I know, but as a matter of fact, I don't have such concrete and precise information because I spent only 10 months during the peace times. So I can only say that during my tenure, we were very focused on boosting cooperation with foreign intelligence, with counter partners. During this time I chaired the position the NATO Civilian Intelligence Committee and tried to develop very good relations with all our partners to improve that. So I think that was the moment when the relations with partner were very active. But I think that in the next years, as far as I know, the relations, the reputation of Polish services, especially after the set of scandals related with this reputation, this cooperation that's related significantly, especially within with some European countries, but some services were very strong, especially the presence of some services were very strong in, especially after the invasion of Ukraine, of Russia to Ukraine, and then I am sure that the presence of foreign partners liaisons in Poland was very visible, and I expect that the cooperation was quite active, but I don't have very precise details about it.
Dave, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Just briefly. And hey, Stephanie, it's good to see you. I think there's a very long answer to this question, actually, and so I've put it in the chat for you. I was just asked to write it, but for the insider. When I, just as a personal note, writing things as an American, former intelligence officer for a .ru domain is just a whole new world that we're in. Never thought that that was going to happen, but I was pleased to do it. And so that really lays out my thoughts, but it also lays out lots of interviews that I've done. And there was a piece in Foreign Affairs about a month or two before. The short answer is that in the case of Austria, I think so on counterterrorism, right? Because we saw the threat to the Taylor Swift concert. That stuff is going to continue, right? I think, there's no double standard policies and the rest of it. So I think that's going to continue. But on certain, what I've been hearing from NATO members is that on certain topics, they just don't want to share it with the US. So counterproliferation, probably okay. Iran, probably okay. Counterterrorism, generally, probably okay. But on stuff like Russia, maybe people get a little bit nervous because when you have people in very senior positions who have no no background in intelligence at all, they might not know how to handle it. They might not have the judgment to understand about what it means or to be discreet or whatever. And one of the things that I've told people at the working level is what you can't do with the United States is you can't say, okay, this is for you, Dave, but you can't put it into your system or something like that. It places intelligence officers in an impossible situation. So they have to share, if they want to share, with the full knowledge and the full understanding of where that information is going, and then make an advised decision whether or not they want to do it. One of the facts of the matter is that the United States gives more and better intelligence than it gets. That's not to say that liaison isn't crucially important. It absolutely is. As one person I interviewed said, it's not a nice to have, it's a necessity. But walking away from the United States would probably be shooting countries in the foot. They'd shoot themselves in the foot as well. And so they basically, as one person said, they kind of feel trapped, because you still have to keep the relations going with the United States, not only now, but for the future. But at the same time, they don't really want to, kind of be open kimono. So I'll keep that answer short because I see other hands. But anyway, that's the broad headline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so again, if you want to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand. So we have now Josh and then Elena. Maybe maybe you should just go one after the other in the interest of time. So please.
Great. Thanks for excellent talks. A quick question for both of you. It's interesting to be in a Zoom call full of intelligence professionals and practitioners. And the question is, what are you guys going to do? Right? So how do you deal with this movement towards populism? How do you think about being an intelligence professional at a time in which new governments are coming in who are anti-institutionalist, right? Populist is maybe the right word, but probably the wrong one. It's they're anti-institutionalists. They want to wreck stuff. And they happily are willing to include intelligence agencies in the things they want to wreck. So I'm curious, are there best practices for dealing with such a government, right? Should, for instance, intelligence professionals be a little less public, even retired intelligence officials, and stop going on TV and stop, joining the political fray? Or are there other pieces of advice that you would give to your colleagues? Over.
Thank you for this question. Keep it in mind, and we'll go briefly to Elena. Again, if you can keep it brief.
Sure. Thank you for the talk. Very interesting. I never thought I'm going to see it in my lifetime when the US becomes very close to Russia and the Soviet Union in terms of intelligence, of what we wrote about the intelligence failure. But my question mostly to Dave is, if you were to design a system that is not liable to such failures, even in theory, how would you shield the intelligence agencies from the political layer? Like, would you create it maybe on the same lines as the military, where there's a small interface between the military and the political leadership, but the workings of ordinary officers and troops is not subject, well, beyond the influence, say, in the press or stuff like that? And how would you prevent this total takeover and wrecking, as Joshua said, of a system that seemed to be working fine before that? Thank you.
Okay, so either of you would like to jump in?
I can go quickly, and I'll go maybe in reverse order, Elena. That's a really interesting question, about sort of, system design. And I'll give you a little bit of a punt in that I actually think the system is good in the US. I think the system is sound, but everyone has to play their role, right? Or the system doesn't work. If you were to, I don't know, maybe this is a bad analogy. I'm just sort of thinking out loud, but it's a little bit like a coach of a sports team, right? Like if you don't play the system, right, that the coach has designed, it's not going to work. And so, just thinking about what would I do? I would have an apolitical structure. I would have whistleblowing. I would have oversight. I would have the lack of loyalty tests. And so each time I think about designing a system, Elena, I actually come up with the US system, more or less, right? So the irony is that I wouldn't actually do anything different. I would just do what the system is designed to do, actually, which is a little bit of a punt, but it does bring me to Josh's question. And Josh, it's good to see you. My toe is mostly out. I'm a military reservist, as you know, but I think there's a personal question, and then there's a broader question, for people who are fully in. For me, I could just tell you personally, Josh. I was a little bit quiet early on. I thought I saw things that were wrong. But I just decided maybe, I don't know, a month or two ago, it was really after, you want to know the truth, it was after the Zelensky meeting in the Oval Office. And I just said, that's wrong. I'm not going to normalize it. I'm going to say it's not okay. And if that costs me something, then that's fine. Because ultimately I need to be able to look at my son and have him say, but, Dad, why didn't you say anything? And so I just made a personal decision. And I can tell you from friends who are very concerned. I'll tell you two quick biggest pieces of anecdotal evidence. The first one is a friend of mine runs a very large consulting firm in DC, and he says he gets multiple calls a week for people trying to figure out what's the next lily pad that I could jump to. And I bet you he's not the only one. I think there's tons of people out there. Which brings me to anecdote two. One intelligence agency that will not be named, a friend of mine had he wanted to get his CV cleared, right? Because you have to get even your CV cleared before you can apply for a job, in the civilian world. And they said, great, we'll get back to you in months. And he said, what do you mean months? It normally takes a couple days. Well, there are thousands of people ahead of him in the CV clearing line, right? So this is a 5-alarm fire. In terms of what to do, I think that the people who do go on television, kind of the famous 51, to use a terrible shorthand, I think they're in an impossible situation because, as you say, you shouldn't really, the formers aren't supposed to go on TV and yak. At the same time, however, they're in an impossible situation because the government, the Trump administration is saying things about intelligence and intelligence community officers that are just flatly untrue. And they, as you know, can't defend themselves. And so they have no one to defend them if the formers don't go on. So I don't think the formers want to go on TV and fight these battles. I think they'd rather be retired, golfing. But I think that they feel that they are in an impossible situation where if they don't do it, who is going to? And so they will acknowledge that they are breaking a norm, but they feel that the norms have so badly been broken already that they can't just be like, well, that's a terrible norm being broken. I just have to sit here and sort of keep my norms. I think they think that when people are shouting into the bullhorn, that they have to at least say something back because otherwise it's going to get worse. And so I think that's the calculation that they make. And of course, they open themselves up to charges of not comporting with norms, right? You're not supposed to go on TV after you retire. But I think they also think, by and large, that it's a five-alarm fire, and that's just what they have to do. Over.
Thank you.
Wait, sorry. Can I say one more thing, Josh? I forgot one more thing. What my advice to the youngsters is advice that they've already gotten from a million other people, so it's pretty unoriginal. But they have to decide in their own minds what is it that would call for that would necessitate their resignation. So I'll just give you one example. One person told me, if the U.S. decided to treat Ukraine and Russia evenly as part of peace talks, if the U.S. started sharing intelligence with Russia because they're sharing it with Ukraine and it all has to be equal, then he would resign. And so I do think that people are going through their own their own conscience and trying to decide, what can they stay for, and what would just necessitate them saying, look, I just can't be part of this anymore. I never thought about that stuff when I was in. I guess maybe I was young and naive, but I always thought we were the good guys. And now I think it's imperative for everyone on the inside to ask themselves some hard questions. Thanks. Over.
Thank you. Grzegorz, over to you. If you'd like to take up the question.
Yes, I think that the question, the first question is the answer depends, of course, on different experiences in different countries, because it's everything is dependent on the situation and concrete situation. So I having in mind my experiences, I am not very optimistic. So I think that there is no simple way to deal with this problem, because we have to see the broader picture, because the situation, especially in Poland, related with the status or the situation in services, is related directly to the whole state. So our state is very obsolete. So the services and everything, the whole context is obsolete, and it's a bit easier to deal. To combat with this problem in such obsolete country, because but first of all, with democratic context. So in this situation, I think that the main source of help is to build awareness in the society, cooperating especially with the media. So media have a very important, crucial role to play in that. So I know that from my perspective and experiences, that it's very difficult for media to cooperate with people and talk about services, because it's not very sexy issue, so very specialistic, and the audience is not very interested in that, and not many people understand what is going on, and what about we are talking what about. So but without cooperation, strict cooperation with media, of course it depends on the regulation, because in Poland there is no regulation about the possibility of be active in media for the persons retired from services. I know that for example, in the USA there are strict regulation which prohibit it, but in Poland we have total freedom. But of course, the personal responsibility is also very important, not to say things which are sensitive. But I think that the media and cooperation, building awareness, and of course, strict contact with them.
Okay, thank you very much. I will use your answers to this question as a segue to present our next session, which will be dealing specifically with how the bureaucracy, the civil service, should approach these challenges. So we will be hosting Professor Michael Bauer from the European University Institute, who studied ethics of the bureaucracy in different contexts where they faced similar challenges. So I would like to thank both of our speakers. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and for these very, again, powerful remarks on a highly sensitive, but yet, as you said, Dave, alarming situation. We really appreciate it. thank you all for joining us, and please do join us next week as well for the final session of this webinar.
Thank you very
Good
much.
evening and shalom.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.